when 12-year-old Jamal Carter boarded Flight 539 with only $4 and a bag of trail mix. The first-class passengers didn't give him a second glance. He was just another kid in patched-up sneakers who didn't belong in their world. But 30 minutes into the flight, tech mogul Mason Bellamy's baby began wailing with a force that shook the whole cabin. Despite Mason's best efforts, offering toys, playing soothing music, even Googling baby techniques, nothing seemed to work. That's when this quiet boy from Detroit's toughest block stood up and said 5 words that took everyone by surprise. "I can calm your baby." What happened next would shake the foundations of wealth, wisdom, and the notion of who holds the most valuable lessons in life. Sometimes, the smallest voices speak the greatest truths. As Jamal made his way through the bustling security lines at Los Angeles International, his worn-out sneakers squeaked on the smooth tiles. The strap of his old backpack dug into his small shoulders, and he gripped his boarding pass tightly, checking it every few seconds as if the gate number might change. When he reached the TSA checkpoint, the agent barely looked up. Jamal placed his backpack on the conveyor, and the X-ray machine revealed its modest contents: a change of clothes, a half-empty water bottle, and a brown paper bag with his trail mix. "Flying solo?" the agent asked with a distracted glance, noticing his age. "Yes, sir," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness inside him. "Visiting my aunt in Chicago." The agent nodded, waved him through, and Jamal continued his way to gate D12, weaving between business travelers with their designer luggage and families wrangling their excited children. He found a quiet corner near the gate, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. 20 minutes before boarding, the energy around the gate shifted. Passengers started whispering and pointing toward the entrance as a man in a crisp navy suit, worth more than most people's yearly salary, walked through the terminal. Mason Bellamy was the kind of man who exuded confidence, like someone who could buy the entire airport if he felt like it. His expensive shoes echoed with each step as he made his way to the gate, his assistant trailing behind him, juggling a phone and a tablet. But it wasn't just Mason that caught people's attention. Cradled in his arms was a baby, no older than 6 months, wrapped in designer clothes that seemed ridiculous for an infant. The baby's face was beet red, scrunched in distress. "Mr. Bellamy, are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" his assistant asked, almost running to keep up with him. "I've got it, Natalie. The team needs you here for the quarterly reports," Mason responded, cutting her off. The assistant still looked doubtful, but handed him a high-end diaper bag. "Formulas in the front pocket, extra diapers in the main compartment, and his pediatrician's number is in your contacts." "I've got it," Mason assured her again, though his awkward shift in holding the baby spoke volumes about his uncertainty. The baby whimpered as Mason adjusted his hold, the discomfort growing on both sides. Just as boarding began, Jamal watched the first-class passengers file onto the plane. One woman with a pearl necklace sneered as she passed him, clutching her Louis Vuitton bag like it might catch a disease. A businessman, noticing Jamal's patched jeans, snickered with his companion. Jamal had seen these looks before, back in his own neighborhood, where everyone knew each other and clothes were just clothes. But here, surrounded by suits and polished shoes, he felt out of place, like a dandelion in a garden full of roses. When his boarding group was called, Jamal made his way down the jet bridge, the flight attendants flashing him a polite smile, though he caught the flicker of concern in their eyes. Another unaccompanied minor to manage. His seat was 26B, an aisle seat in economy class. As he stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, Jamal noticed Mason Bellamy struggling with the baby's car seat in the first-class section. His movements were sharp and frustrated as he attempted to secure it, while the baby's cries started to intensify. "Can I help you with that, Mr. Bellamy?" a flight attendant named Sarah asked, her badge gleaming under the cabin lights. "I've got it," Mason muttered, though it was clear he didn't. After a moment of further struggle, Sarah gently intervened, clicking the car's seat into place with practiced ease. The plane filled quickly. A few rows ahead of Jamal, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun settled into her seat. Behind him, a man clutching the armrests nervously was clearly a first-time flyer. The cabin hummed with conversation, the sounds of passengers settling in. Then, without warning, the baby's cries escalated, cutting through the cabin like a siren. The baby's wails weren't just from tiredness. They were raw, desperate sounds of distress. Jamal, from his seat in 26B, could feel the tension in the air as Mason fumbled through the diaper bag, pulling out an expensive-looking rattle. He shook it near the baby's face, but the crying only worsened. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice crackled over the PA system, barely audible over the baby's cries. "We are currently third in line for takeoff. Please bear with us." Passengers began shifting in their seats, trying to ignore the noise, but it was impossible. The woman in first class shot an annoyed glance over her shoulder, while two teenagers a few rows behind Jamal pulled out their phones and started recording the commotion. "For crying out loud," the businessman sitting across the aisle from Jamal muttered. "A billionaire can't even calm his own kid?" Sarah returned to first class, offering to walk the baby, but Mason waved her off, his face red, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he bounced the baby up and down, patting his back with too much force. Then, not enough. The crying intensified as the plane began its ascent, and Jamal could feel the atmosphere in the cabin growing heavier. The baby's face was turning purple with the effort of crying, while Mason's hands shook as he tried to comfort him. "This is ridiculous." A man in a polo shirt stood up from first class. "Can't someone do something about that?" "Sir, please remain seated while the seatbelt sign is on," Sarah said calmly, though Jamal could see the concern in her eyes. "I paid $5,000 for this seat," the man continued. "I didn't pay to listen to a baby scream for 4 hours." More passengers began chiming in with complaints. The elderly woman next to Jamal shook her head disapprovingly. Someone suggested the baby should be put in the cargo hold. The tension in the cabin continued to grow. From his seat in 26B, Jamal watched as the situation unfolded. He knew that cry. It had a particular pitch to it, the same sound his neighbor Mrs. Gray's baby made when he had gas bubbles. Jamal had spent many evenings helping her when she was too tired to handle another sleepless night. Mason was now trying a bottle, but the baby turned his head away, the formula spilling down his expensive outfit. Jamal thought of his grandmother, how she used to say, "Baby cries are just words they don't know yet. You've got to listen with your heart, not your ears." The businessman across from Jamal was now loudly complaining on his phone, no doubt posting about the nightmare flight. The teenagers were still recording Mason's struggle, and Mason himself looked like he might either break down or snap. That's when Jamal unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, slowly walking toward first class, aware of the stairs following him. His sneakers made soft sounds against the carpet, almost lost in the cries of the baby. "Excuse me, Mr. Bellamy," Jamal said quietly when he reached Mason's row. Mason looked up, his eyes wild with frustration. He took in Jamal's worn clothes, the patched jeans, the faded t-shirt, and his expression hardened. "What do you want?" Mason snapped. "I know how to stop him from crying," Jamal said simply. "Just trust me for a minute." The first-class cabin went silent. The only sound left was the baby's cries. Jamal held Mason's gaze, trying to convey his certainty. Sarah watched from her jump seat, ready to intervene if needed. The man in the polo shirt let out a dismissive laugh. "Trust you," Mason said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows babies," Jamal replied steadily, his voice calm despite the weight of the stares from every direction. The baby let out another painful scream, and something in Mason's expression seemed to crack. His pride fought against his desperation, and for a moment, Jamal thought he might refuse. Then another voice from the back of the cabin shouted, "Just let him try. Anything's better than this." Mason's grip on the baby tightened for a moment, and then, slowly, reluctantly, he held the child out toward Jamal. The entire first-class cabin erupted in whispers and barely concealed laughter. The man in the polo shirt was the loudest. "This is rich," he said. "A billionaire needs a street kid to handle his own baby? This is going online for sure." Jamal adjusted his hold, his arms instinctively knowing what to do. He brought the baby up to his shoulder, supporting him with one hand and gently pressing against his back with the other. He started to sway slowly, his body moving with a smooth, rhythmic motion like tall grass in the wind. Then, Jamal began to hum. It wasn't just any tune. It was something old, something his grandmother had passed down to him. A simple lullaby, haunting in its simplicity, rising and falling like the waves of an ocean. The baby's cries began to hiccup, slowing down, the desperation fading from his wails. "What is that?" Sarah asked, moving closer. "Just something my grandma used to sing," Jamal said quietly, still swaying with the baby in his arms. "She said it wasn't the song that mattered, it was the vibration. Babies feel it through your chest. Makes them remember being inside their mama, where everything was safe." The baby's cries turned into soft whimpers, and Jamal reached into his pocket, pulling out a small cloth. It was worn but clean. He held it near the baby's face, just close enough for the child to smell it. "What are you doing?" Mason asked, rising slightly from his seat. "It's okay," Jamal said, still humming. "Babies see better with their noses than their eyes at this age. New smells upset them. This cloth smells like lavender oil. My grandma used it." Sure enough, the baby's whimpers faded completely. His tiny fist, which had been tightly clenched, slowly relaxed. He made a small, contented sound and nuzzled his face into Jamal's shoulder. The first-class cabin was absolutely silent. "That's impossible," the man in the polo shirt said, his voice no longer mocking. But it worked. Jamal continued to sway, his humming now so quiet it was almost imperceptible. He patted the baby's back gently, following a specific pattern. 2 pats, a pause. 3 pats, a pause. The baby let out a small burp, then another, and Jamal nodded toward Mason. "Gas bubbles," he explained, glancing at Mason. "The pressure changes during takeoff make it worse. You have to help them work it out, but gently. Their bodies are still learning how to do things we don't even think about." The baby, now completely calm, was asleep in Jamal's arms. Jamal carefully transferred the baby back to Mason, who cradled him gently. Mason's expression had changed. He looked at Jamal with a mix of awe and realization. "How did you know all that?" he asked quietly. "I've been taking care of babies since I was 8, Jamal said simply. "You just learn when you have to." Jamal turned to leave, but Mason called out to him. "Wait," Mason said. "Stay with us, please. In case he wakes up again." Jamal hesitated for a moment. "Okay," he said, "but I need to see my aunt first." With that, Mason agreed, and the flight attendants arranged for Jamal to sit across from him. As they settled in, the blonde woman from earlier leaned toward her husband. "You know," she said, "that kid just did what your entire executive team couldn't." Mason didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at Jamal with newfound respect. "What would you want to do in life, Jamal?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. Jamal looked down at the baby in Mason's arms, then out the window at the clouds below. "I want to help people," Jamal said, his voice quieter now. "I want to be a doctor, like my grandma always said I could be. I just need a chance." The flight continued, and Jamal settled into his new seat, trying to focus on the destination ahead. But as the plane glided smoothly through the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, the one with Mason, the baby, and the unexpected opportunity, was a turning point in his life. Mason, for his part, seemed lost in thought as he held his son, who was now peacefully asleep in his arms. The billionaire had once controlled entire industries, but right now, holding his child in the quiet cabin of an airplane, he was a man who didn't quite know what to do. "Jamal," Mason said softly, breaking the silence. "Thank you for everything." Jamal nodded but didn't say much, still trying to process the surreal nature of the past few hours. It wasn't lost on him that he was sitting here, next to a billionaire, having helped his son calm down. Who could have imagined? As the plane began its descent into Chicago, the conversation shifted again. Mason asked him about his life, about his family, about his dreams. Jamal answered honestly but briefly, his words reflective of the modest life he had come from. He spoke of his grandmother, how she had raised him, and the many nights he'd spent helping out in the community, learning from others in his building who had so much to give, despite having so little. When the plane touched down at O'Hare, the tension that had built up in the cabin dissipated. The flight attendants started their usual routine, preparing the cabin for arrival. But there was something different about this landing. A quiet understanding had passed between the passengers. Something had shifted in that brief 4-hour flight. Jamal, the boy from Detroit, had done more than just calm a crying baby. He had brought a father and son together in a way that no amount of money or power could have. As they left the plane, Mason turned to Jamal. "Come with me. We're going straight to the hospital to see your aunt." Jamal didn't hesitate, nodding quickly. His mind was still spinning. "Thank you," he said, a little unsure of how to express the whirlwind of emotions that was building inside him. Mason smiled, though it was a bit strained. You've done more for me today than anyone else. I think you've earned the right to see your family. Let's go. The car ride to the hospital was smooth, the traffic in Chicago light for once. Jamal sat quietly in the back, staring out of the window. His mind kept replaying the events of the flight. How he had stepped up, how Mason had reluctantly accepted his help, how the baby had finally calmed down in his arms. There was a peace in that moment, in the rhythm of the baby's breathing, that Jamal hadn't expected. But there was also a realization dawning on him. He was more capable than he'd given himself credit for. He could help people. He had helped someone. And that feeling, the feeling of being needed, was something he hadn't experienced in quite this way before. When they reached the hospital, Jamal felt a wave of nervousness. The doors opened and he stepped out of the car, looking up at the hospital building. It was large, modern, and intimidating, but it wasn't the building that mattered right now. It was his aunt. She was the reason he was here. Just a second, Mason said as he held the door open for Jamal. I'll go with you. You're not alone in this. Jamal nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. When they walked into the hospital, the sterile, almost too clean atmosphere hit him. The nurse at the desk looked up and smiled when she saw Jamal. Mr. Bellamy, she greeted him. What a surprise. How can we help you today? I'm here with Jamal, Mason said, motioning to him. He's going to see his aunt, Denise Washington. Of course, the nurse replied, giving them directions. She's in room 514, just down the hall. As Jamal walked toward the room, Mason by his side, he couldn't help but think about how different his life was right now. Just a few hours ago, he was a kid with nothing but a peanut butter sandwich and a prayer. Now, he was about to meet his aunt in a hospital room, accompanied by a billionaire who, just moments ago, had been helpless in the face of his own child's distress. The door to the room creaked open, and Jamal's eyes immediately landed on his aunt, Denise Washington. She looked tired, pale from her treatments, but her smile was warm and welcoming. Her eyes brightened when she saw him walk in, though she immediately noticed the baby in Mason's arms. Mason, Denise said softly, looking up in surprise. What's going on here? This is Jamal, Mason said, his voice gentle as he shifted the baby. He's the one who helped me on the flight. I figured I'd bring him here, so he could see his aunt. Denise's expression softened, her gaze falling on Jamal as he stepped into the room. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence stretching between them. Then, slowly, Jamal walked forward, and before anyone could say anything, he gave his aunt a big hug, careful not to disturb the tubes and lines attached to her. I'm so glad you're okay, Mama, Jamal said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. Denise held him tightly, her voice weak but full of affection. I'm getting there, baby. And it looks like you've been busy today. She looked at Mason, then back at Jamal. Jamal nodded. It's been a weird day, but it's good. I'm good. Mason, standing at the side with the baby still in his arms, cleared his throat. I think it's time we talked about a few things. Jamal, I want to offer you something. Something that could change everything for you and your family. Mason, standing at the side with the baby still in his arms, cleared his throat. I think it's time we talked about a few things. Jamal, I want to offer you something. Something that could change everything for you and your family. Jamal looked at Mason, then at his aunt. His heart was racing, but he was cautious. What's that? I want you to help me with my son, James, Mason said, his voice steady. I need someone who understands babies, someone who knows what they need. And I think you're the right person. Jamal felt his stomach twist. I'm just a kid, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Mason shook his head. You've shown me today that you're far more than just a kid. You've got something valuable, Jamal, and I want to help you make something of it. I'm offering you a job. You can help me with James, and I'll help you with your future. Jamal's mind was reeling. This wasn't what he had expected when he boarded the plane this morning. What kind of job? You'd be a child care consultant, working with me and other families. And I'll make sure you get the education you need to become a doctor. I know you've got a dream, Jamal, and I want to help you get there. Denise's eyes widened. She looked at Jamal, then at Mason. Are you sure about this? Mason smiled softly. Absolutely. I'm not just offering you a paycheck, Jamal. I'm offering you a future. Jamal stood still for a moment, processing everything that was happening. His mind raced back to his grandmother's words. When God opens a door, Don't stand there wondering why. Walk through and see where it leads. Finally, Jamal looked at Mason, then back at his aunt. Okay, I'll do it. But I need to know one thing. What's that? Mason asked. Can I still help the people in my building? The mamas and babies? They need me. Mason smiled. Of course. We'll figure out a way for you to help them too. Jamal nodded, feeling a sense of purpose settle over him. All right, let's do it. And so, that was how Jamal Carter, a 12-year-old boy from Detroit, found himself working for Mason Bellamy. It wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to change not only his life, but the lives of others as well. Together, they began creating something that would help countless families in need, a place where wisdom from those who'd lived it was valued more than expensive degrees. Jamal continued to help Mason with his son, teaching him what he knew about babies, while also continuing his studies and working to fulfill his dream of becoming a doctor. As he helped families, taught classes, and mentored others, he never forgot where he came from, always bringing the lessons of his community with him. The Harmony Corner initiative grew rapidly, with locations opening in cities across the country. The foundation Mason started, which began with Jamal's techniques, became a beacon of hope and education for parents who needed more than just medical advice. It was about community, empathy, and understanding the value of what others had to offer. Jamal had started with nothing more than a peanut butter sandwich and a hope for a better life. But through his kindness, his wisdom, and his willingness to help, he had changed not only his own future, but the future of so many others, proving that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. As Jamal continued his path, he kept his promise to his grandmother to make something of himself, and in doing so, help others do the same. The story of his journey, one that began on a plane from Detroit to Chicago, became a testament to the power of empathy, love, and the idea that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most profound truths. As the months passed, Jamal's life continued to transform in ways he hadn't imagined. The Harmony Corner initiative was thriving, and every day, he found himself teaching more and more parents. What started as a small idea had snowballed into something that affected entire communities. And the best part was that it wasn't just Jamal's work. It was a collective effort. The mothers from his neighborhood, like Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Williams, had become the heart of the project. They brought with them decades of experience, wisdom that hadn't come from books but from years of raising children, caring for others, and surviving against the odds. Jamal's dream of becoming a doctor was closer than ever. With the scholarships Mason had arranged, he was now enrolled in an accelerated program for high school students interested in medicine. He spent his evenings in classrooms, his weekends at Harmony Corner, and every moment in between studying. It was a lot for a 12-year-old, but Jamal knew it was his chance to make a real difference, not just for himself, but for the entire community that had supported him. Mason, for his part, was doing his best to balance his role as a father and a CEO. He had never imagined that a child, someone so young, would teach him so much about being a parent. He started spending more time with James, even bringing him to the office occasionally. His colleagues began to notice the shift. Gone were the days of Mason Bellamy, the cold and distant businessman. Now, he was the father who, despite all his wealth, still needed guidance from a 12-year-old boy on how to calm his son. One evening, as Jamal walked back to the guest suite Mason had set up for him, he passed the now bustling Harmony Corner. He watched as mothers, fathers, and grandparents gathered, sharing their knowledge and stories, swapping techniques and tips. It felt like home. These were his people. This was where he belonged. For the first time in his life, Jamal didn't feel like he was just passing through a world that didn't see him. He was shaping it, piece by piece. One chilly evening in early fall, Jamal was heading out to visit his mother at the new apartment Richard had secured for them. She was doing better, her treatments were working, and she was regaining some strength. It wasn't the lavish place Mason had given him to stay in, but it was safe, and it was theirs. As Jamal was leaving the Harmony Corner building, he saw Mason walking towards him with James in his arms. "Hey, kid," Mason called out, a grin on his face. "Got a minute?" "Always," Jamal said, smiling back. He had grown used to Mason's presence in his life, and while it still surprised him how comfortable they'd become, it was also a relief. Mason wasn't just a boss. He was someone Jamal could talk to, someone who cared about more than just business deals. I've been thinking, Mason began, his voice a little more serious than usual. About the future. About this foundation and what it could become. Jamal raised an eyebrow, curious. What do you mean? Mason set James down, who immediately began toddling toward Jamal, giggling. Jamal crouched down to catch him before he could faceplant. I mean, I've been talking with some people, Mason continued. We've got the attention of several major donors now, and they're interested in funding something bigger, expanding this program nationwide, or even internationally. Jamal straightened up, his heart skipping a beat. That's incredible. But there's a catch, Mason finished. They want to take control of the narrative, the direction of the program. They want to brand it in a way that feels more corporate. Jamal nodded slowly, understanding the stakes. So they want to change it. Exactly, Mason said, looking down at James as he pulled at his pant leg. I'm not sure I'm ready to let that happen. Harmony Corner isn't just about helping babies, Jamal. It's about real people, real knowledge. And I won't let them turn it into another marketing campaign. Jamal thought for a moment. He knew Mason had built a billion-dollar empire, but it wasn't that world that had gotten them this far. It was their community, their shared values. It was the wisdom of people like Mrs. Johnson and the experience of mothers who knew more about babies than any manual ever could. Then we have to stick to our roots, Jamal said firmly. Keep it about the people, about the community. Mason met his eyes, and for a brief moment, Jamal could see the weight of all those decisions in his face. Then, a look of resolve took over. You're right, Mason said, his voice steady. No one gets to take the heart out of this project. I'll turn down the funding if it means losing what makes this special. Jamal smiled. And I'll help you do it. Mason laughed, the tension lifting from his shoulders. I've got a feeling you'll be running the show before long. Jamal shrugged, trying to seem modest, but his heart swelled with pride. I just want to help people, he said quietly, looking down at James as he crawled toward a toy. That's all. A few weeks later, Jamal found himself sitting at a new desk in a much larger office than he was used to. It wasn't an office he'd earned through his work with Mason. It was a new opportunity entirely. He had been invited to speak at a national conference for community-driven healthcare initiatives. As part of the program's growth, Jamal had become a recognized voice in a field he had never imagined entering at his age. He had given talks at universities, met doctors who were eager to learn from his practical experience, and now he was here, surrounded by some of the country's top healthcare leaders. As he looked around the room, he saw people in suits, shaking hands, discussing research papers. He felt out of place, until the event organizer, a woman named Dr. Lena Choi, stepped up to the microphone. She was an expert in child development, a renowned pediatrician, and someone who had followed Jamal's work closely. We've invited Jamal Carter here today because he is not just a kid from Detroit, Dr. Choi began, her voice carrying through the room. He is a pioneer. He's taken knowledge from the streets, real, lived experience, and applied it in ways that no textbook or academic conference ever could. We are here to learn from him. Jamal stood up, the room full of attentive faces now looking directly at him. He didn't feel nervous. For the first time, he felt ready. I'm not a doctor yet, Jamal began, his voice steady. But I've spent my life learning from people who know what it's like to raise a child with nothing but love. The work we're doing with Harmony Corner isn't about fancy degrees or million-dollar grants. It's about people sharing what they know. It's about empathy, not expertise. And it's about finding the wisdom in the everyday.